Hello, I'm Anya Lichtarowicz, and this is Somewhere on Earth. Today we have an episode created by AI, looking at two subjects we've just not had time to cover in 2025. Following our first AI-generated show 2 months ago that we made using our previous shows, this week we go a step further. Listener Adam Collins commented on our Facebook group, Somewhere on Earth, the Global Tech Podcast. Do join us there. It's a lovely space. Well, Adam posted about our first AI show and was pleasantly surprised as to how listenable it was. He also wondered what would happen if we put in more basic source material into the model. So we've done just that. We've put in the original sources that we would use to set up a discussion on the show. But instead of finding real people to talk, we've let the AI do it. We've used Google Notebook LM, so the AI has only used the verified sources we've given it. So here you go. Cybersecurity and the potential threat of AI.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we've synthesized a huge stack of global reports from Seibel, Mayer Brown, Kaspersky, and the NCSC all on the 2025 threat landscape.
And honestly, the trends are pretty alarming.
They really are. Our job today is to cut through all that noise and give you the critical intelligence you need, because this threat, it's just not theoretical anymore.
That's really the core message, isn't it? We're moving beyond seeing cybersecurity as, just some IT problem.
Yeah.
It has become a fundamental challenge to business survival and increasingly to national resilience.
And you see it in the headlines.
Absolutely. When you look at high-profile incidents recently, Marks & Spencer, the Co-op Group, Jaguar Land Rover, where production literally stopped for weeks, you see cyber risk hitting the bottom line.
Hitting the bottom line and real-world supply chains.
In really tangible ways.
So our mission in this deep dive is to map out the reality of this escalating environment for you. And what's, I think, most chilling is the consensus across all these sources. Attackers aren't necessarily inventing brand new attack vectors. Instead, they are industrializing. They're scaling existing methods with a dangerous, unprecedented efficiency.
Exactly. So we've broken this down into 4 critical areas you absolutely need to grasp. First, the industrialization of cybercrime, which is being driven by the AI accelerator.
Okay.
Second, the very aggressive evolution of the ransomware economy.
Right.
Third, the intensifying geopolitics driving attacks on CNI. That's critical national infrastructure. So think utilities, healthcare.
And finally?
And finally, the critical need to achieve genuine board-level resilience.
Okay, let's unpack that first one, the industrialization of cybercrime. This is where AI and generative AI are, completely changing the game.
And this isn't theory. The reports show that something like 16% of reported cyber incidents now involve attackers leveraging AI tools.
So what's fascinating here is how AI is turning this into a volume game, right? It just outpaces traditional human-led defenses.
It really does.
Yeah.
The kind of sophistication that used to require a dedicated, highly skilled team is now basically available as a service.
Wow.
Threat actors are using Gen AI to get unauthorized access in these highly tailored ways that are incredibly difficult to spot.
And this is exactly where the quality of the attacks just spikes, isn't it? We're not talking about those poorly translated mass spam emails anymore.
Not at all. Gen AI tools are perfecting social engineering. The first way we see this is through AI-enhanced phishing.
Okay.
These systems can produce tailored emails, texts that include highly specific contextual details about the target organization or even the individual. The tone is natural, the grammar's perfect.
Which dramatically increases the likelihood someone's going to click that malicious link.
Of course. It immediately bypasses one of the oldest and simplest defenses.
Yeah.
Look for bad spelling or awkward phrasing. The attack just looks and feels legitimate.
And that sophistication extends beyond text.
It does, into voice. The second major vector is phishing. Threat actors use AI-generated scripts and voice clones in targeted telephone campaigns.
So they can sound like your boss.
Exactly. They can persuade a victim to download malware or disclose their credentials by sounding exactly like a trusted colleague or a supervisor.
And the third way is maybe the most visually terrifying. Deepfakes. These audio or visual impersonations that just weaponize trust.
The reports highlight how effective these are. Think about that well-publicized incident where threat actors used publicly available footage of a company's chief financial officer.
I remember this.
They created these convincing deep-fake videos, which were then used to trick an employee into transferring a staggering $25.6 million.
It breaks every piece of traditional advice because the visual and audio confirmation seems undeniable.
It does.
And that leads directly to this idea of a lowered barrier to entry that we talked about. This is where it gets really interesting. The sources mention vibe coding.
Yes, vibe coding, where a user can essentially just describe the malicious code they need in simple, natural language.
It's like a prompt.
It's like a prompt. And because public AI tools have ethical guardrails, malicious platforms have sprung up. We're talking about tools like Fraud GPT or Worm GPT.
With zero constraints.
Zero ethical constraints. They allow people with almost no technical background to create dangerous, custom malware and execute credible attacks at scale. It's essentially democratizing sophisticated cybercrime.
And the implication of that is immediate monetization. I saw Fortinet predicts that AI won't just steal data, it'll instantly analyze it.
Yes, analyze stolen databases, prioritize high-value victims based on wealth or vulnerability, and then generate personalized, high-pressure extortion messages.
So data is being converted into currency faster than ever before?
That's it. The whole cycle from compromise to cash out is accelerating. It puts immense pressure on defense teams to respond in minutes, not days.
So if AI is the accelerator, how are criminals actually making their money? That brings us to our second big trend, ransomware.
Still the most acute and pervasive threat out there. Cyber reported a shocking 50% surge in successful ransomware attacks year over year.
And we're seeing a strategic shift in how these attacks are run. It's not just about encrypting data anymore, is it?
No, they've moved way beyond that. Attackers are adopting much more aggressive, multi-pronged extortion techniques.
Like what, specifically?
Well, we're seeing dedicated campaigns to harass employees, contact their clients, dump data publicly, not just once, but over and over again to ramp up the pressure.
And they're also threatening the operations themselves.
Exactly. Threatening to disrupt critical operations, which guarantees prolonged downtime and skyrockets the recovery costs. It forces victims to consider paying just to stop the business from failing.
So let's look at the major players. Who's driving this?
A lot of the names are familiar, but their tactics are evolving. Lockbit, for example, they reemerged in early 2025 with Lockbit 4.0.
A new toolkit.
A new toolkit, new capabilities, and very aggressive campaigns, especially in the U.S. private sector. And then you have Scattered Spider, who are masters of social engineering.
And they often bypass multi-factor authentication?
Yes, across all sorts of industries.
And what about the emerging heavyweights?
We have Akira. They emerged as the second most prolific group, right behind Quillen. They really seem to prefer construction, manufacturing, professional services.
Sectors that can't afford downtime.
Precisely. But the master of disruption is still CL0P. They reaffirmed their status as a zero-day specialist.
Right.
They posted hundreds of victims in one mass campaign, exploiting vulnerabilities in widely used enterprise file transfer software.
Hitting those widely deployed but kind of unsexy corporate tools, that's a huge bypass of traditional defense.
It is. They target the soft underbelly of large enterprises. Now, there's one strategic glimmer of light here.
Okay.
Organizations are getting smarter about paying. The reports noted that about 63% of surveyed organizations actually declined to pay a ransom in the past year.
Which is a meaningful increase.
It is.
And that decision not to fund the economy of crime is critical. But even if you don't pay, the costs are still astronomical, especially when the breach starts in your supply chain.
Oh, the third-party supply chain compromise is an incredibly costly and difficult threat to manage.
Why is that?
These breaches incur an average cost of, $4.91 million? That's higher than any other attack type. And they take significantly longer to identify and contain.
And why do they take longer?
Because the initial access doesn't come through your defenses. It comes through a trusted vendor.
Yeah.
Attackers target these third-party software providers specifically to get a foothold.
Which allows them to move laterally.
Exactly. They move laterally across the broader corporate ecosystem, especially inside cloud platforms and SaaS environments. You're patching your perimeter, but they're already inside through the contractor door.
That just highlights the scale of the problem. And when we expand that lens from commercial crime to state-level threats, the stakes get even higher.
Which brings us to the geopolitical landscape and the critical national infrastructure crisis.
Right. The NCSC reported handling a record 204 nationally significant cyber incidents in the UK.
Which is more than double the 89 they handled the previous year.
Sure.
A massive jump.
And that jump really underscores this widening gap between the capability of nation-state actors and our ability to defend critical systems.
It does. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we're seeing 4 key state actors with very distinct, very active approaches.
Okay, let's start with the most sophisticated. China.
China continues to demonstrate sophisticated, persistent capability. We saw their campaign, Salt Typhoon, which is all about cyber espionage in telecoms.
And then there's Volt Typhoon.
And crucially, Volt Typhoon, which involves the deliberate, long-term prepositioning of malicious code inside critical national infrastructure systems.
Prepositioning code inside power grids or water systems, I mean, that sounds less like spying and more like preparing for potential physical disruption.
That is precisely the concern being raised by defense agencies globally. It's basically an insurance policy for a future conflict.
Wow.
And separately, we saw the vast Flax Typhoon botnet exposed. Over 260,000 compromised devices.
And what about North Korea, the DPRK? Their focus seems to be illicit revenue.
Absolutely. They're seeking intelligence and critical revenue to fund their state programs. They used a really interesting new tactic, recruitment fraud.
How does that work?
They actually fabricated documentation to get people hired into legitimate IT support roles in U.S. and U.K. companies, specifically to harvest credentials and get high-level network access.
Unbelievable. And Iran and Russia.
Also busy. Iran-linked actors used GenAI tools, interestingly, not just for the attack, but to amplify leaked information after a hack, magnifying the reputational damage.
On Russia.
Russia's primary focus remains on Ukraine, but they inspire these pro-Russia hacktivist groups who are actively targeting CNI in NATO countries. It just increases the unpredictability of it all.
This raises a critical and often horrific point. We have to emphasize that these cyber-initiated attacks can have immediate, tangible, non-digital consequences.
That's the ultimate cost, isn't it? It's easy to talk about millions in fines, but the Synovis ransomware attack in healthcare last year, it led to significant clinical disruption across London hospitals.
And the fallout directly contributed to at least one patient death.
Tragically, yes. When cyber hits the health sector, it stops being abstract very quickly.
And manufacturing is also flagged as the most attacked sector globally. Why there?
It's largely their heavy reliance on operational technology or OT systems that run the factory floor. These systems are often older, less secure, and highly sensitive.
So stalled production lines, empty shelves.
Those are the real-world costs. And their tolerance for downtime is practically zero, which makes them perfect targets for aggressive extortion.
The threat landscape is clearly accelerating, it's diversifying, and that really points to the fact that prevention and detection, well, they're not enough anymore.
Not even close.
So we have to address this widening gap between the threat and our defense capabilities. But what's holding business leaders back from taking sufficient action? We see these massive, high-profile examples everywhere.
Well, the primary behavioral barrier is what research calls optimism bias. Leaders know these things are happening, but they just assume they're highly unlikely to happen to them.
It's something that fits a competitor down the street.
Exactly. Not their own company. And this bias is reinforced because cyber risk is still so often framed in complex technical terms, not intangible business outcomes.
So the required shift is translating cyber risk into actual business risk. Stalled production, reputational collapse, major financial loss.
Boards have to govern cyber risk just like they govern financial or legal risk. It's a core fiduciary duty.
Which is why tools like the Cyber Governance Code of Practice are so important.
Exactly. They provide these essential non-technical steps for boards. It focuses on 5 core principles: risk management, strategy, people, incident planning, and assurance. Leaders have to set the tone.
Okay, so given all that, what specific technical and strategic recommendations should someone listening be implementing right now based on these reports?
You start with proactive preparedness. Organizations must conduct robust tabletop exercises that specifically incorporate these evolving threats, like a deep-fake extortion attempt or a catastrophic third-party compromise.
You have to practice recovery before the disaster hit.
You do. And on that supply chain problem, you have to reinforce your mitigation. This means performing criticality analysis on your vendors.
Who can take you down if they fail?
That's the question. And you must demand attestation that they follow secure software development practices. use a baseline like the UK's Cyber Essentials.
And that program is really worth noting. The data shows organizations with that certification are, 92% less likely to make a claim on their insurance?
It's a powerful incentive.
So the technical defense has to shift from just building a taller wall to engineering recovery. Resilience, not just resistance.
We have to move beyond basic detection to engineering genuine systemic resilience. This means using concepts like infrastructure as code for rapid reconstitution.
Meaning you can destroy a compromised system and rebuild a clean one almost instantly.
Right. You also need segmentation to minimize the blast radius during an attack. And crucially, a comprehensive adoption of Zero Trust Architecture, or ZTA.
ZTA gets thrown around a lot as a buzzword. What does it functionally mean for a defender?
It means you eliminate implicit trust. You have to assume everyone, inside and outside the network, is a potential threat. And you verify every single request before granting access.
Which is essential for stopping that lateral movement we talked about.
The signature of those third-party breaches.
And identity is still the biggest attack vector. What's the ultimate defense there?
The whole industry is pushing for passkeys to become the default authentication method. They're seen as critical for strengthening resilience at scale because they eliminate the systemic risks of traditional phishable passwords.
But, passkeys sound great. But if they rely on a single device, doesn't that just create a new, potentially bigger single point of failure if that device is compromised or lost?
That's an excellent point. It absolutely shifts the risk. Passkeys need robust recovery and synchronization methods across devices, and frankly, those are still maturing.
Right.
The key insight, though, is that they eliminate the user being the failure point through phishing, which is overwhelmingly the most common attack vector we see today.
Okay, finally, let's revisit this idea of radical transparency. It seems completely counterintuitive in security.
It does, but technology is often just too opaque, and that favors the attacker. An NCSC expert quipped that we know more about what's in our sausages than our software.
Which is an unacceptable situation in 2025.
Totally. So radical transparency means vendors must make critical security info support roadmaps, vulnerability records, update statuses, easier for defenders to access than for attackers to find. So, to summarize this whole deep dive, cyber resilience is, unequivocally, a critical part of business longevity and success. The challenge is accelerating, no doubt, due to AI and geopolitics. But the foundational security controls, like Cyber Essentials, Zero Trust, they remain overwhelmingly effective.
But the commitment has to be continuous.
It has to be.
That is the path forward.
Yeah.
Strategic, board-led commitment.
We've talked a lot today about cyber resilience, which is the ability to survive a shock and get back to normal. But I think there's a higher bar we can aim for, and it's built into these recommendations about learning and reconstitution. Organizations should strive for anti-fragility.
That idea, right, where you use the disruption itself as a mechanism for improvement. You aren't just bouncing back to where you were. Exactly. You build systems that grow stronger because of the disruptions they experience. Every incident, every shock shouldn't just be contained. It has to lead to a deep strategic refinement of your protections and your response.
It forces you to build recovery systems that are actually faster and more reliable than the original systems you're replacing.
So the question to ask yourself is this. When the inevitable next cyber shock hits your organization, will you merely withstand it and limp back to baseline? Or will you use that incident as the catalyst to evolve and make your organization fundamentally stronger and more anti-fragile for the future?
This is Somewhere on Earth, the Global Tech Podcast. Now we move to e-waste, a topic we've covered many times before, but somehow let it slip a little in 2025. So here's an AI podcast summary of where we are now.
Today on the Deep Dive, we are hunting for treasure. Not, gold or jewels, but something that is arguably a lot more valuable for the future of the planet.
We're talking about an estimated $91 billion worth of critical raw materials.
Exactly. And it's hiding in the most mundane place imaginable, your home. Specifically, your old phones, dusty laptops, and that box of defunct chargers in the back of your junk drawer.
This is the global e-waste challenge, but it's being reframed entirely. It's not just a pollution problem anymore. It's a massive critical resource challenge, and it's already shaping, global economics and geopolitics.
Right. So the mission of this deep dive is to figure out what happens when the world's demand for the green and digital transition, we're talking massive pushes for electric vehicles, solar grids, AI infrastructure,
Everything.
slams into the finite supply of what are called critical raw materials, or CRMs. The solution, in theory, is recycling. But a huge recoverable supply of these CRMs is currently trapped.
Or, as one source put it, sleeping in our drawers and attics.
I love that phrase.
And that tension really defines our conversation today. I mean, we need these materials desperately, yet we're losing them to landfills or, even worse, to these toxic, uncontrolled processes.
So we need to analyze the scale of this hoard, follow the global flow of this, toxic trade, and really understand the policy battles happening right now in countries like India over who gets to control this future.
The urgency is real. You've got the international community for International E-Waste Day this year basically shouting that the materials we need for 2030 are literally sitting in our basements right now.
So what's so special about these materials? Why are they critical?
Well, that's the key, isn't it? They're mined in only a handful of countries, often under conditions that make the supply fragile or, let's say, geopolitically sensitive. They are the chemical backbone of everything we're trucked to build.
Which brings us to the policy side almost immediately. We've set some pretty ambitious targets to try and lock down that supply, haven't we?
Ambitious is an understatement. I mean, they're revolutionary. If you look at the European Union's CRM Act, it sets this breathtaking target.
What is it?
By 2030, 25% of all annual CRM consumption must come from recycling.
25%. That's huge.
It's not just a regulatory nudge, it's a fundamental commitment to building what people are calling an urban mine.
And to hit that target, we'd need way more sophisticated tech and just a massive, massive increase in the sheer volume of stuff being collected.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack the sheer size of the prize here using the data from the WE forum.
Let's do it. So the hard numbers for 2022. Globally, we generated 10.7 million tons of e-waste.
That's hard to even picture.
It's staggering. It works out to about 20 kilograms of potential resource per person across the entire planet.
And inside that 10.7 million tons, the data shows there's about 1 million tons of those essential critical raw materials.
Right. But here is where the reality really hits hard. Of all that e-waste, only 54% was compliantly managed.
Only half.
Just over half. Almost half, 46%, went completely outside of any formal regulated channels. It's either lost to landfill, informally processed, or just hoarded.
And that 46% loss is just. It's deeply worrying because when you look at what the compliant processing did manage to recover in 2022, you see the potential we're missing out on.
Absolutely. From the waste we did manage, we recovered 0.4 million tons of CRMs. This includes huge quantities of things like 162 kilotons of copper,
which you need for EV infrastructure,
and 207 kilotons of aluminum, foundational for energy transmission. But the really critical stuff, the geopolitically sensitive materials, were recovered in much smaller amounts.
Things like silicon for microchips.
Exactly. Only 12 kilotons of silicon and just 2 tons of palladium.
2 tons doesn't sound like a lot.
But that 2 tons of palladium is huge in context. It's critical for fuel cells, for catalytic converters, and its supply chain is notoriously concentrated in just a few places.
So every single gram you recover matters.
Every gram. It reduces reliance on potentially unstable mining sources. The challenge is crystal clear. If we're missing 46% of the entire stream, we are missing a huge percentage of those vital materials.
And the problem's only getting bigger, right? The projections for the future are not great.
No. By 2050, global e-waste generation could jump to 19 million tons. The recoverable CRMs would increase too, but only if we can actually capture the waste.
This is where we need to stop talking about these huge global numbers and figure out where this stuff is physically hiding.
And the Eurostat data for the EU illustrates this perfectly. It helps us find that urban mine right in our own homes.
I think this is the most eye-opening part of the analysis for the average person listening. We're tracking the difference between what we buy and what we collect.
Precisely. In the EU in 2023, for every person, 32.2 kilograms of new electrical and electronic equipment, or EE, was put on the market.
So new phones, washing machines, solar panels, smartwatches, all of it.
All of it. But only 11.6 kilograms of WEE, the waste, was officially collected per person.
Wait, hold on. So if I bought 32.2 kilos of tech last year and only 11.6 kilos of old stuff was collected, that 20.6 kilo difference, that's the stockpile.
That's the growing stockpile.
It's devices still being used, or more likely sitting in a drawer waiting to be thrown out, or
already diverted into unregulated informal treatment systems. That 20.6 kilogram difference per person is the hoard, and it is accelerating.
it's getting worse.
Much worse. Since 2015, the amount of new equipment being sold has grown by 78%, but collection is lagging way behind, only growing 60%.
So the gap is getting wider. The collective stockpile of CRMs in our homes is growing exponentially.
It is, which makes that EU 25% recycling target for 2030 sound almost, well, impossible, unless we dramatically change our behavior.
You see huge differences between countries, too.
You do, and it reveals different patterns. So the Netherlands, for instance, had the highest input of new electronics, 45.4 kilograms per person, but their collection,
Let me guess. Low.
nearly 4 times lower, just 12.3 kilograms. They have a massive and rapidly growing internal stockpile.
It seems like only Bulgaria is managing to keep up, where collection basically equals what's being sold.
They're an exception. For most of the developed world, we are sitting on a time bomb of material that we critically, desperately need.
And that brings us right back to the core paradox.
Yeah.
This stuff is simultaneously a critical resource reserve, an urban mine, and one of our biggest toxic liabilities.
It's both at the same time.
Let's focus on that treasure side again, that $91 billion figure. I need you to sell the scale of that. What does that actually mean?
It's a staggering economic loss. I mean, think about it like this. That $91 billion is comparable to the entire gross domestic product of a country like Ghana.
The entire national economy.
The whole thing, the value we lost in 1 year, is equivalent to an entire country's economic output.
And yet we only recovered about $28 billion of that total value.
Right.
So we are voluntarily just throwing away over $60 billion in metals annually.
It sounds like a catastrophic market failure because it is.
And it's a massive missed opportunity for the climate.
A huge one. When we talk about recovering e-waste, we're not just talking about metals. We're talking about climate mitigation. Proper recovery could avoid 93 billion kilograms of co-equivalent emissions.
How?
By reducing demand for super carbon-intensive virgin metal extraction and by capturing refrigerants from old fridges and air conditioners. It's one of the quickest ways to decarbonize our material supply chains.
Okay, so now we have to flip to the truly dark side of this paradox.
Yeah.
The toxic liability. That 46% of unmanaged waste, if it ends up in informal channels, is, well, it's a human health disaster.
It really is. When it's improperly burned or dismantled, often by low-wage workers with basic tools and zero protective gear, it releases this witch's brew of hazardous substances.
Heavy metals, plastics.
Flame retardants, you name it, and the health outcomes are terrifying.
They're measurable, right?
Oh, they're measurable and devastating. Studies have directly linked these informal disposal sites to serious health outcomes like DNA damage, neurodevelopmental delays in children, and chronic illnesses. One specific study found that living near just 2 of these sites in West Africa increased neonatal and infant mortality by a chilling 10 percentage points.
10%. And this is all happening despite international regulations like the Basel Convention that are designed to stop this.
The flow continues, driven by illegal and very often mislabeled trade. The scale is huge. In 2022, 5.1 billion kilograms of e-waste crossed international borders.
And where to go?
That's the key. 3.3 billion kilograms of data that flowed from high-income countries to lower-income countries through undocumented shipments.
Why are agreements like Basel failing so badly? Isn't the whole point to control the movement of hazardous waste?
It is, but enforcement is weak and the loopholes are massive. The biggest one is the one regarding reuse.
Reuse?
Exporters routinely mislabeled devices that are completely irreparable, which should be regulated as toxic waste, as used electrical and electronic equipment intended for reuse.
So if you just slap a reusable sticker on it, it skips all the regulatory hurdles.
Exactly. It's the mechanism that allows high-income countries to essentially externalize their environmental and health burdens onto countries with fewer resources.
This is what's often called toxic colonialism.
It is. Global economic inequalities drive the flow of environmental risk. We saw this play out recently with a massive seizure, right?
Yes, tell us about that.
In May of this year, 2025, Thai authorities intercepted 238 tons of e-waste that was illegally imported from the United States. It was falsely labeled as harmless scrap metal.
And this highlights the gaps, especially with the U.S., because it signed the Basel Convention.
But never ratified it, which means it doesn't have the legal teeth to fully restrict its own outflows of toxic waste.
So at the end of the day, this whole toxic flow is driven by one thing: the stark difference in cost.
That cost differential is the central economic engine of this entire system. To do this properly in a regulated environment, it's expensive. Studies show downstream processing costs for things like old phones and notebooks run about $177 per ton in Europe.
And in the U.S.,
$145. But the informal sector completely undercuts that.
by how much?
Profoundly. In a place like Agbogblashi in Ghana, a worker might process 30 kilograms of material a day, earning around $11.
$11.
If you do the math, they're processing that material for roughly $374 per ton. It's a massive cost advantage that regulated formal facilities simply cannot compete with.
But those workers are bearing the entire health cost.
Yeah.
And we've seen that when one country tries to ban these imports, the problem just moves somewhere else.
It just shifts. China's big 2018 ban, for example, just diverted the flow, but didn't stop it.
Right.
It instantly shifted to other nations like Thailand and Malaysia, exploiting the same permit fraud and mislabeling loopholes. So we're just moving the risk and the toxicity around.
And the global external costs of all this, the lost value plus the environmental damage, is something like $78 billion a year.
An incredible figure.
So if the problem is that big and just shifting the flow doesn't work, that brings us to the global fight to formalize recycling. And there's a fierce legal showdown happening in India right now.
India is a crucial case study here. They're the world's third largest e-waste producer, and they're trying to industrialize quickly. They want to secure their own supply of CRMs, lithium, rare earth metals.
It's a national security issue for them.
It is. It's part of their $4 billion national critical minerals mission. So formalizing recycling is absolutely paramount to that goal.
But the government's new regulations triggered lawsuits from some huge electronics manufacturers. So what exactly is the government trying to do?
They brought in new rules that require manufacturers to dramatically increase their recycling targets up to 80% by March of next year, 2026.
Okay.
But the really contested rule is this. They must pay a fixed minimum price of 22 rupees, or about 25 cents per kilogram, to authorized formal recyclers.
Why would a fixed payment be so contentious? Isn't the whole goal to incentivize recycling?
Well, the industry, led by giants like Samsung, LG, Daikin, they argue that the fixed price is arbitrary.
Arbitrary.
They claim it's 3 to 4 times higher than what the market dictates, and it inflates their costs. They say it's anti-competitive and that the 80% targets are just unrealistic because there isn't enough licensed infrastructure yet.
So they prefer the old system.
They prefer the flexible market-based system they had before, which was based on trading certificates.
It sounds like a classic market versus regulation debate. What's the government's justification for insisting on this fixed price?
The government's position is that this fixed price is absolutely necessary to ensure that new formal recyclers can get fair compensation and have the capital they need to expand.
To build out the infrastructure.
To build it. Without guaranteed pricing, they argue, formal recyclers can't survive the predatory pricing from the cheap, hazardous, informal workshops. The fixed price is an investment in building a proper, traceable industry.
It's a really high-stakes moment for their industrial policy. And India's formal recovery rate is actually pretty impressive already, isn't it?
It is. It's now exceeding 40%, matching Europe and the U.S. But this push raises a huge social question.
Which is?
While formalization is necessary, you can't ignore the human cost. More than 90% of collection and dismantling is still carried out by informal workers in India.
Millions of jobs.
Millions of jobs are at risk. You're talking about displacing marginalized workers who often have few other options. The real challenge is finding a path to formalization that is inclusive and safe, not just exclusionary.
So we loop right back to the core conflict we started with. The absolute necessity of recovering that $91 billion worth of CRMs to power our green future
is constantly being undermined by the high cost of doing it right and the entrenched yet economically vital hazardous informal global trade.
So where do we go from here?
the insight from analysis, particularly from groups like the London School of Economics, is crucial here. They suggest that instead of relying only on blanket bans and strict enforcement, which, as we've seen, just shifts the problem,
It just moves it around.
the priority should be positive investment.
Investment where, specifically?
In clean, formal infrastructure and capacity in the global south, where the e-waste is already flowing and where there's existing labor.
So build the facilities where the work is already happening.
Exactly. The goal should be to leverage the existing labor cost advantages, but ensure the operations meet strict environmental protection standards. We have to make formal recycling economically viable and safe globally, not just expensive locally.
That perspective is key to actually solving the issue, rather than just masking it. And it brings us to our final thought for you, the listener. We started with that startling data from Eurostat.
We did.
You bought 32.2 kilograms of electronics, but only 11.6 kilograms were collected.
And that 20.6 kilogram difference is the growing stockpile of CRMs that every nation needs to meet those 2030 targets. So considering the critical global need for those materials and the fierce policy debates over who should pay for it, what personal responsibility does that growing stockpile place on us to actively manage our own devices?
Something to consider next time you stumble across an unused device. It's not just old junk. It's a tiny, valuable piece of the world's most sought-after treasure. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the urban mind beneath our feet.
Thank you, dear listener, for downloading and streaming in 2025. As always, please join us on our socials. @SoapTech is where you will usually find us. If you would like more soap, then please subscribe for just $10 a month by searching somewhere on Earth the global tech podcast pod.Van. The production manager, as always, is Liz Tui, and Anya Lichtarowicz, i.e. me, is the editor. Thank you and goodbye.